of Revenue and Expenditure for the year 2024. And like my colleagues and others who have gone before me, I wish to place on record, Mr. Speaker, my very best wishes to everyone within the sound of my voice. So those who are listening online, those who are in the House on this side and on the other side, those who are visiting, Mr. Speaker, I extend best wishes for the holidays. Mr. Speaker, I want to begin this afternoon on the subject of transformation. So much has been said about transformation from last Monday to a couple minutes ago. And Mr. Speaker, I want to make this very important point, that transformation has not been taking place just over the last year and a half. And I say this way, Mr. Speaker, because I would not stand here this afternoon and say that the current government has done nothing in the last year and a half. We heard we've done nothing in 30 years. I would not reduce myself to this, Mr. Speaker. But what I would say on the subject of transformation is that when we speak about transformation, we are speaking about seriously impacting extreme and radical change, Mr. Speaker. That's what transformation is. And so we ought not to confuse everything that we do with transformation. And we use the word so loosely. So, Mr. Speaker, when we speak about the name change of a project, that's not transformation. That doesn't make the project transformational. When we make superficial changes, yes, I might be sleeping, to projects, that does not mean, Mr. Speaker, that is transformational. So when we paint stones and bridges, that's not transformation, Mr. Speaker. There's a definition for transformation. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, I've been thinking and rethinking, even reimagining transformation over the past few days because I've heard it so many times. But you know, when I think of transformation, Mr. Speaker, my mind goes back to the rural electrification program. My mind goes back to connection of pipe-borne water to rural communities, the construction of a cruise ship terminus, the construction of the Western and Eastern Main Road, connection of high-speed internet to schools, Mr. Speaker, liberalization of the telecommunications sector, introduction of payment for government services online is not the first time, Mr. Speaker. Providing devices to students and principals and teachers during a pandemic, Mr. Speaker. Introduction of e-books during a pandemic, Mr. Speaker. My mind keeps going back on transformation. Mr. Speaker, the construction of a cricket and athletic stadium, Mr. Speaker. Major initiatives in youth like the EMMALIN program. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I listen to the beating up of the EMMALIN program, Mr. Speaker, over and over and over again. But, Mr. Speaker, we identify the weaknesses. Every program would have that. But, Mr. Speaker, we are not identifying persons in the medical sector. We are not identifying principals, teachers, persons who rose to the rank in banks, in private institutions, Mr. Speaker. Ask them. Many of them came through the EMMALIN program. Mr. Speaker, when I think of transformation, I think about thousands of scholarships to students from rural communities, changing their lives, changing the lives of their families, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I even think about the introduction of the bathroom and toilet program. Call it whatever you want, wash, whatever it is, Mr. Speaker, transformation. But you know what's significant? Mr. Speaker, all of those initiatives that I reference, Mr. Speaker, they were implemented during the last 30 years under the leadership of the new National Party government. Mr. Speaker, and many of them, Mr. Speaker, if you research, you go back, you would realize that while some of these things were happening, Grenada experienced 2 major hurricanes. Mr. Speaker, Grenada experienced a recession, world recession. Mr. Speaker, and then a global pandemic. The performance of the new National Party government must be mentioned whenever the word transformation is mentioned, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I will always, doesn't matter where I am, I will always be grateful for the contribution of the NNP administration to the transformation of the socio-economic landscape of this country, Mr. Speaker. Over all these years, under the leadership of Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Claudius Mitchell. Mr. Speaker, whatever individual personal differences, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to go down that road. But, Mr. Speaker, don't go there. What I would say is that the contribution that this man has made to this country, Mr. Speaker, he ought to be respected for that. And I will forever respect him for his contribution to this country. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to debate either which Mitchell is better than which Mitchell. I'm not going there. Mr. Speaker, you could choose whichever Mitchell. But what I know, Mr. Speaker, not long ago, this Mitchell was a hero. But, Mr. Speaker, today he is zero. And that is why I say, you know, time is longer than twine. Mr. Speaker, let us not get into those trivial debates. Mr. Speaker, time is always longer than twine. Oh, yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to speak about education. In the last budget, we were told that the focus of the budget for education would be on resilient school infrastructure, curriculum reform, technological and vocational training, enhanced transformational just keeps coming up because it's repeated so many times. Trivially, Mr. Speaker, technological capacity and education financing. So, Speaker, that was supposed to be the focus of the 2023 budget for education. Mr. Speaker, having looked at the budget document, I'm convinced that very little focus in 2023 was placed on these areas. Let me start, Mr. Speaker, resilient school infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, in 2023, the budget committed rehabilitation of 5 schools: St. Joseph's Convent, Grenville, J.W. Fletcher Secondary School, St. Andrew's Anglican Primary School, Grenada Christian Academy, St. David's Catholic Secondary School. Mr. Speaker, last year, as you realize, I said very little on education because I needed to give some space so that things can happen. But this is now 1.5 years, Mr. Speaker. All of those 5 schools, Mr. Speaker, were part of the GEEP project. And, Mr. Speaker, this was funding from the CDB. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, the CDB made a visit to Grenada and expressed tremendous satisfaction with the progress made under these projects. Mr. Speaker, 1.5 years later, these projects are way off schedule as it relates to the schedule that was established in 2022 before this new administration assumed office. Mr. Speaker, no construction took place under any of those 5 schools in 2022 or 2023. Let's use one example. Mr. Speaker, Grenada Christian Academy. And I heard the table knocks, and I remember somebody, as I said that, for the Grenada Christian Academy signing of the contract. Mr. Speaker, this school should have been under construction since 2022. And as I said before, internal changes were made to facilitate this. Mr. Speaker, the process of bidding, the process to have the bidding for that project would have started. Engaging occupants. So don't come and tell me, Mr. Speaker, we took a year and a half to get the people off the land. Mr. Speaker, I am saying that this is not acceptable as it relates to the efforts that were made by the team working in collaboration with the CDB. Mr. Speaker, St. Andrews Anglican Primary was scheduled to start in 2022 as well. St. David's Catholic Secondary School, Mr. Speaker, the biggest hurdle with that school was finding lands. It was such a difficult process. The bank came down. Representatives of the bank came down, Mr. Speaker, and I was so elated when they approved the current site identified for this project. Mr. Speaker, the bank offered support to speedily move the process forward to get that school started. Mr. Speaker, construction was due to commence in 2023. Mr. Speaker, outside of GEEP, only $10 million was spent in 2023 on school rehabilitation and maintenance. Mr. Speaker, this amount was totally inadequate for the robust program of improving, maintaining, and expanding schools, particularly during the period 2020 and 2022. Mr. Speaker, 75 schools were rehabilitated during that period, and I'm not speaking about under the GEEP project. Mr. Speaker, I'm advising, and maybe I should add this, those 75 schools, most of them, Mr. Speaker, based on the program, it was a 3-year plan. Based on the program, most of those work took place during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm not sure what excuse we can have now. But I want to go, Mr. Speaker, to the St. Giles Anglican Primary School. Mr. Speaker, in 2022, as a matter of fact, before the campaign for the last general elections, I remember explaining the structural problems when asked as it relates to why the St. Giles Anglican Primary School needed to move to the Holy Cross RC School. Mr. Speaker, a campaign was mounted against this plan. A campaign was mounted to ensure that parents and other stakeholders did not support the move of the school to Holy Cross. Mr. Speaker, I said time is longer than twine, so I live to see, Mr. Speaker, that after the last general elections, the school indeed was relocated from St. Giles, its home, to Holy Cross RC School. Mr. Speaker, I want to make an appeal because we made a commitment to the parents then that in moving the students to Holy Cross, we were going to support them with transportation. And we have a perfect example. I believe my colleague from St. Andrew Northwest would remember the Monlong situation. Mr. Speaker, until now, parents are awaiting the support and assistance with transportation as they take their children to Munich from Hope. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, I want to make reference to the St. Andrews Anglican Primary School, another school, and as I said very little on those subjects last year. Mr. Speaker, on the 13th of October, the Anglican Primary School, Mr. Speaker, fire would have gutted one building. Mr. Speaker, another building was slightly damaged. And 2 other buildings comprising the St. Andrews Anglican Primary School at its current location, 2 other buildings remained not affected. Mr. Speaker, looking at the situation, I had a conversation with a few contractors, and every single one of them said to me, they cannot see why this repair and rebuilding process cannot take approximately 2 weeks. They said we can take night and make day, get the children back to school. Mr. Speaker, we are going on to 9 weeks now, Mr. Speaker, and nothing has changed about this situation. Mr. Speaker, I visited, and you know what's interesting? When the government visited, they showed the best photos. That's okay. Mr. Speaker, the photos of where the children are crammed in Progress Park, nobody showed those photos. The photos of where the children are in the football building, the clubhouse, Mr. Speaker, and when it gets hot in there, they have to come out on the bleachers, Mr. Speaker. I met a teacher sitting, she said, I can't take the heat in there. Nobody showed those photos. But we showed the photos, Mr. Speaker, of the Craft Center in Grenville and the Home Economics Center in Grenville. Mr. Speaker, I'm appealing. We have 2 weeks. If you want me to recommend a contractor, I could give you some names right now. Mr. Speaker, let us get the work started so that we can move the children back to their previous location for the reopening of school. I am pleading, I am begging. I don't know whose idea it was that this school should function in 3 different locations. Mr. Speaker, it's a strange idea. That's all I'll say about it. It's a strange idea. Very strange. Mr. Speaker, so while I say it's a strange idea, let me add, in case you're not sure what my thoughts are, that the school should be in its current location. Let us rebuild the building that was gutted. Let us repair the building that's been scorched, and let us move the students in. You know what a teacher said to me as I sat there? She said, the biggest challenge I have is sitting here on the bleacher and looking at 2 buildings. Absolutely nothing happened to them during the fire. She said, that's the biggest challenge for me, to look at the 2 big empty buildings there. Curriculum and education reform. Mr. Speaker, under this priority area, $500,000 was budgeted. $500,000. And the government said to us, this is a major priority area. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the year, only 5% of the $500,000 was spent. Mr. Speaker, the project that seems to be touted most as the major achievement under curriculum reform is that of the introduction of local history in our schools. Mr. Speaker, I want to clear 2 misconceptions as it relates to this. Because sometimes people can be made to believe that there are some things that never happened before, and there are some things that not only never happened before, Mr. Speaker. All right, I'll leave that. Mr. Speaker, there are 2 impressions given. One, and deliberately given. You could tell when somebody makes an error. You could tell when someone doesn't know. So I've listened to some persons speak on this subject, and you can tell they genuinely don't know. And you listen to some persons, Mr. Speaker, and you know it's just a deliberate attempt to mislead. So, Mr. Speaker, I listened, and it is said a history book was written for schools since this administration assumed office. Mr. Speaker, I listened again, Mr. Speaker, and I heard local history was never taught in Grenada. Mr. Speaker, let me just share some information for your enlightenment and for others. Local history was always taught in our schools, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, under the social studies program, accommodation was always made for history there. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, a policy decision was taken to separate and focus on local history, making it mandatory in our schools. Mr. Speaker, as a result of this policy position, Mrs. Dow was engaged. So Mrs. Dow didn't land after the last general election. I met with her personally. I met with her with the team, Mr. Speaker. So this was something in train long before the last general election. But to go further, Mr. Speaker, all of the legwork was literally done. Mr. Speaker, and that is why I'm saying, let us not give the impression that this is something, we just came up with this brilliant idea after the general election. That is what was said, and I'm just correcting that this is not the case. So in 2021, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Junior Braveboy, who was then a teacher at the PBC, he was sought after to give support to this process, and he engaged a number of history teachers. In 2022, because there's groundwork, there's legwork that has to be done for that transition to be made. In 2022, Mr. Braveboy was transferred to the Ministry of Education as the curriculum officer for history, and he was given the mandate to lead that process. I've never even heard his name mentioned, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the team didn't just talk about the book. The team reviewed, Mr. Speaker, the manuscript. Mr. Speaker, the team was involved in the process of vetting the content of the book. Now, all this happened before the last general elections, you know. It may not appear that way. But, Mr. Speaker, I said it in the last budget. I support this 100%. How could I be involved in the process of starting something and then say I don't support it? So I said last year, I totally support this. Let us get the books into the schools quickly. Mr. Speaker, as I speak, you check and tell me, Mr. Speaker, if the books has reached all of our schools as I speak. And that is the point I'm making, Mr. Speaker. It is quite okay to continue what we have started. Nothing is wrong with that. But I'm saying, do not give a perception, an impression that is not accurate. Mr. Speaker, the issue of TVET and skills training. And you know, transformation is not the only word. Introduction seems to be another word, a similar situation. So everything we are introducing. So I have heard for the first time we are introducing TVET skills training in our schools and communities. Mr. Speaker, when I went to primary school, there was the Woodwork Center, there was the Home Economics Center, which tells me that skills training in primary school is something that was there quite a long time ago. I am 48 in case you want to know. Mr. Speaker, in 2022, a policy decision was taken to expand that program in our schools and to improve on the arrangements of centralization. And I would advise the government, you know, sometimes there's wisdom in planning and structuring things in a particular way. Jumping to do everything without thoughts don't always work out. Some people believe in luck, but it doesn't always work out. So there's a centralized program. So there's a Woodwork Center, for example, in Grenville, and it serves schools around Grenville. There's a Home Economics Center in Grenville for years, many, many years. Has been servicing students around the area, the catchment area, as we say. Mr. Speaker, I would love to see a center in every school. Nothing is wrong with that. I would give table now. If we bring this year, 2024, a center in every primary school, I would be first. I would speak first. And I would support it. But, Mr. Speaker, my humble advice is, let us upgrade and expand, as the plan was, the central catchment areas as we move to expand the program further. That would be my humble advice, no cost to that. Mr. Speaker, so we can, in the medium and long term, we can do additional things. So we started, in light of this plan, Mr. Speaker, to provide additional equipment, additional specialized teachers, to make sure that the plan progressed in a particular direction. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with expanding. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to secondary schools, you would think that it is the first time we're going to do skills training and TVET in secondary schools. Mr. Speaker, some of our secondary schools are already, in case this is news and it's information, they are already doing CVQ TVET subjects, and some of the areas, Mr. Speaker, furniture making, crop production, commercial food preparation, general construction, garment production, electrical and electronics technical drawing. Mr. Speaker, those are TVET, skills training, and those have been happening for a long time. What I would support, Mr. Speaker, let us expand it. Let us make sure every school have the equipment and the program to do more of that. Mr. Speaker, if you ask me, I also support community skills training, 100%. I heard mentions of certain initiatives, introduction, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recently, and I'm speaking now about 2022, 3 centers for excellence, that's the last set of that would have been established. 3 centers for excellence. And this would be another free advice that I would give, Mr. Speaker. We don't have to go building a center in every community. Because guess what? The cost to build a center is going to run us over $300,000. I say, put equipment. So the money you're going to use from the National Lottery Authority, free advice, let's use and get quality equipment. And what we can do is what we started. When we started to establish centers of excellence, Mr. Speaker, is to use our schools after school hours. So we invested additional resources in SAS, Westerhall Secondary School, and other schools, Mr. Speaker. And we said, and I feel very strongly about that, our school doors must not be closed. So when students have finished at 2:30, 3 o'clock, other people can come in and use the equipment, because I'll tell you what you're going to find out along the way. The cost of equipment is exorbitant, very expensive. And this money you have in the budget there, Mr. Speaker, I could guarantee you it will not be able to properly equip one center if we mean business, if we're serious. And that is why I say, forget who say it, and just consider upgrading and upscaling the existing labs. So we just built in PVC a wing that was over $5 million. Serious investments. Bishop's College, I'm sure, 12 million, 13 million. Mr. Speaker, that school in Grenada, SDA Comprehensive, I'm sure that was about $9 million, Mr. Speaker. I am saying we have made significant investment in buildings. So let us now use the resources to expand the programs that are already in some of these buildings so that people, everybody, Tutbagai, can benefit. And it just has to work. And people prefer that because they do their work during the day, they go to the center in the evening after 2 o'clock, after 3 o'clock. But, Mr. Speaker, another example, because I'm sharing those not with the intention to boast of what this administration did, but since you refer to introduction, it tells me that if you think you are introducing it, means you don't know that it existed. So I'm saying to you, now that you know, you can now go back, look at it, see what you can do to improve it, and you can expand it at the same time. So, Mr. Speaker, in St. Patrick, a skill center, which I believe can be a model, I'm not saying it's perfect, but we can improve on it, you can expand it, it's going to save you some monies. And that center, Mr. Speaker, was established to train persons and to employ them at the same time. Furniture making. Mr. Speaker, you go to the Ministry of Finance, you go to the Ministry of Education, you go around the government service, the prison and the police, and I'm sure you're going to find desks and chairs and other things that came from this center, Mr. Speaker, a model. Then, Mr. Speaker, if you go to polls, I don't know what's happening there. No, I don't pass that very often, Mr. Speaker. But you would find another center of excellence. Would not have been perfect, I'm show. You tell me where you have a perfect program. I want to go right now. So, Mr. Speaker, when you go there, you find young people being trained and hired, Mr. Speaker. Well, I don't know. You have to correct me. She said it's no longer in operation. But, Mr. Speaker, the concept, the idea was to establish centers of excellence around the island, not necessarily building a center in every place. So let us expand, let us improve, let us take advantage. And I'm only humbly suggesting that so you can save some money from the buildings that could go into making the program better. But, Mr. Speaker, the skills training thing went very far. Not just in the schools, not just in the communities, Mr. Speaker. Under the EMMALIN program, Mr. Speaker, hundreds and hundreds of young people earn CVQ qualification, skills training again, Mr. Speaker. And while I'm at the EMMALIN program, allow me to just slip in very quickly here, Mr. Speaker. The issue of EMMALIs and what they're paid and what they're not paid and how much they're going to eat. There are some things, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to get into but I want to make this point. Under the past administration, and I know I was not sleeping in cabinet, a decision of the cabinet was to regularize all of the EMMALIN trainees in ministries, Mr. Speaker, starting with the Ministry of Health that had the largest number. But you don't have to laugh. The Honorable MP from my beautiful parish is right there. She can tell you. The Ministry of Health, Mr. Speaker, was begged over and over and over to submit the data and the names, and decision was taken. Some of them were regularized. Mr. Speaker, you asked Michelle Braffett in the Ministry of Education. She was assigned the officer responsible for collecting all the data of all the EMMALIN teachers in schools. And if you go to DPA, Mr. Speaker, you're going to find the data there because they were just finished with the data. Mr. Speaker, I am saying that to say that at the end of the day, when you make certain comments, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're accurate. You know, not because you say it means you're accurate. Not because you say it means you're accurate. But going back to skills training, Mr. Speaker, I heard that we are going to introduce, we're going to start, we're going to get into a partnership with NULO. Well, I prefer to hear the word continue and expand, Mr. Speaker, because guess what? The former administration, together with the SKY program, Mr. Speaker, about $1 million was invested in the program at NULO in recent times, 2022, to ensure that skills training was provided, particularly, let's look at who. And these were not the regular NULO students, Mr. Speaker. But we are talking about young men and women who wanted an opportunity. We speak about hand up, yes. Hand up took place in the last administration, but they could not afford. So transportation was covered. It didn't matter which part of the island they came from, Mr. Speaker. Transportation, $1 million provided to support these people, Mr. Speaker, so they can get an opportunity. But you know, on top of that, skills training, we're still talking skills training, Mr. Speaker. We increased the subvention for NULO from $50,000 to $75,000. And I say to the administration, let's expand, let's improve. Why not give them $150 now? Sister would love that. Mr. Speaker, I am therefore saying that a lot of work took place, a solid foundation, Mr. Speaker, as it relates to these initiatives. And all I'm saying is that you have my 100% support in expanding, but you are not introducing. It is so. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage that you continue to speak of your commitment to skills training, but I just want to encourage that you don't just speak it, but you demonstrate it. So when I look in the budget, Mr. Speaker, it speaks about a new name, National Innovation Skills and Enhancement Program. And I thought that's nice. Actually, the acronym is nice. I thought that was a nice name. The acronym is actually nice, right? But, Mr. Speaker, when I look at the allocation for 2023, it says $895,000. We're serious about skills training. It is a focus, it's a priority, and I love that. But let us demonstrate it. Oh, you now know that things are a process. You never knew that before. Ah, welcome. Things can be a process, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, of the $895,000 budgeted, only $388,000 was spent on the NICE, a skills enhancement program. And I'm only saying, Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying anything else, you know, all I'm saying, let us expand them, let us improve them, let us ensure that more people are benefiting. But when we say the monies, let us spend the monies too. Let us not just quote figures and say it's the biggest budget in history. That doesn't add up. So I'll quickly move, Mr. Speaker, to free tuition. And there's a member of the other side, I don't know if it's deliberate, Mr. Speaker, there's a member on the other side who continue. I corrected it last year, and I noticed people keep saying free tuition. But as a member on the other side, who I believe now, I have reason to believe, is deliberately referring to this program as the free education program. Mr. Speaker, it says free tuition program. That's what it is. I heard the member for St. Patrick East said that we criticized this program. Mr. Speaker, if you go back, and I make no joke with these things, if you go back, you would find that I said I supported this. And if I support and I follow with some constructive criticism, nothing wrong with that. Nothing is wrong with that. It is intended to help to make the thing better and to improve for other people, right? Nothing is wrong with that. That nothing. Mr. Speaker, under the free tuition program, I want to just share a few observations, and I'll stick to my own constituency in case you don't want me to go there. So, Mr. Speaker, there's no objection to this program. Absolutely none. You have the money, you could give everybody. We've always said that. We didn't have it to give everybody. You have it to give everybody, no problem. We will talk about that. Mr. Speaker, so if you have enough money now to give everybody free tuition, no problem. I nothing. Mr. Speaker, what I would say is let us be a little more considerate now to the many students who have received free tuition but are still having trouble going to school. Because, Mr. Speaker, having free tuition and no transportation don't make a lot of sense. Mr. Speaker, well, you know, I try to avoid responding, and please don't tempt me too much, because when you say that, and you talking about 2024, I am not talking about 2024. I'm talking about children who dropped out in 2023 because of this problem, Mr. Speaker. So don't tell me what's going to happen in 2024. Try not to disturb me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, under our administration, we gave free tuition to students, but we did not just stop it at free tuition. Let me just make sure and make it clear, because I don't want anybody to say that I said what did not exist. We did not give to everybody. We could not afford to give to everybody. But we gave to those persons throughout the length and breadth of Grenada who applied and expressed an interest and were in need. But, Mr. Speaker, on top of that, we didn't say here is free tuition, that's it. Transportation support was provided, Mr. Speaker. Uniform support was provided, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, supported with exam fees. So you give the free tuition, and now after I would have benefit from the free tuition, I cannot now do the exam because I cannot pay for the exam. So all I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is this. The This is great, free tuition. But it does not benefit many people that I represent, because even when they receive it, they are still unable to assist their children to go to school. So I am not going to say cut it, you know. I'm not going to say cut it and take from the people who could afford it. I'm going to say, based on your reports, you can now add on transportation, you can now add on meals allowance, you can now add on assistance to pay for examinations, based on your glowing reports. Mr. Speaker, all I would add to that, even if it means taking 2 million from the 14 million for independence, even if it means taking something from the 213% increase in CBI revenue, Mr. Speaker, whatever it takes, Mr. Speaker, let us do something for these children more. But you know, that's not the only point that's significant. Because a student who is going to NULO or TAMCC, who has transportation, let us imagine, they have tuition, they have transportation, they have meal. Mr. Speaker, do you know that in addition to the tuition at TAMCC and NULO, there are other fees, Mr. Speaker? And Mr. Speaker, some of those can go as high as 1,000 plus. And Mr. Speaker, because of that, there are some students who right now are unable to attend to those institutions because they can only access tuition. Mr. Speaker, I know of a time when tuition was provided, but we also paid for the toolkit. We also paid for the other things where people were not able to access it, but it was necessary to attend school. Moving to school feeding. Mr. Speaker, if you know me well, you know I'm going to say this is great. Remove the school feeding fees. And one person said, well, it's just $1. I agree with him, it's just $1, but some people don't have $1. Yeah, I know that's why you remove it. Mr. Speaker, what we don't seem to understand is that principals and teachers in Grenada do have a heart. So, Mr. Speaker, since this program started, a child who could not afford, don't have the money, they ate meals at school. This is not new. Mr. Speaker, there are children who have never paid for school feeding, and they eat every day in school. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm saying all of that, okay, let's go one step further. And he says, let's remove the embarrassment. Okay, fine. Let us remove the embarrassment. Let us remove the embarrassment. So now they're not paying. And as I said, make sure you get me right, I've said it, I totally support. No payment. You could afford, no payment. But Mr. Speaker, that's not a real issue, you know. I'm really not concerned, quite honestly, about the children paying $1. I'm really not concerned about that. You know why? As I've said before, it's a policy decision that the children who don't have, and they're hungry, they don't have anything to eat, they were fed. But you know what concerns me, Mr. Speaker? You speak to principals, speak to teachers, and they will tell you this is the worst they have experienced of this program in the last year. Mr. Speaker, and this is not a story I'm making up, you can verify it if you wish. Mr. Speaker, we thought when somebody did a live saying that they were having porridge for lunch, you thought that was a joke. That was not funny. Mr. Speaker, if we research, we would find at least 2 schools that I know of in Grenada. The porridge was in Carriacou, I think I heard. In Grenada, where students were served bread and hot dog for 3 days, Mr. Speaker. 3 days. And you think it's because the children love bread and hot dog? No. And that is why I'm saying removing the dollar is not the issue. Because even when they're paying the dollar, Mr. Speaker, we have a big problem. because schools are not receiving supplies for the school feeding program. Mr. Speaker, in one or two schools that I've spoken to, principals had to actually pay when the truck came from their pocket so that the children can eat. Mr. Speaker, I am extremely concerned. As I said, removing the dollar is fanfare, in my opinion. Let us do it, but it's fanfare compared to the current situation on the ground with this program. Mr. Speaker, in 2022, and the current Minister of Education was part of that process, the process started to develop an operational manual for this program. I wish to strongly recommend, Mr. Speaker, that this be completed if it was not completed, and that it be used. Regularization of teachers. And as I said last year, I hardly spoke on education, and deliberately so. Mr. Speaker, between 2021 and 2022, a very detailed process started to regularize another batch of teachers. The intention was to regularize all teachers in the system. And this was following 2019, when 200 teachers were regularized in the service. 200 teachers. Mr. Speaker, all the data was collected by the Ministry of Education for the second and third batch, which would have completed the process of all those who were eligible for regularization. Mr. Speaker, this data was in the process of being verified by DPA, and a lot of work, Mr. Speaker, took place in regards to this initiative. Mr. Speaker, I'm really saddened to learn that this project or this process did not move much further than where it was in 2022. And that is why I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, by now, all of those 200 teachers should have been regularized. And let me make the point also that this process of regularization is very different to the regularization of persons in the public service in other sectors. That point must be made. But there's another point, Mr. Speaker, because when we go to regularize these people, we ought not to be regularizing them from 2023 or 2024, because I notice there's a new trend. Mr. Speaker, let us make sure that these persons receive all of their benefits by regularizing them from the date that they were supposed to be regularized. Mr. Speaker, I want to move now to social development and a few areas that were mentioned. And I want to start with the housing program. And I'll actually start with Stony Gut. So, Mr. Minister, I'm saying very little today about Chinese low-income housing. I think you know exactly my views on this. Mr. Speaker, in 2023, the government said Stony Gut project will start. It is a climate resilient housing development pilot project which aims to construct modern, high-quality, climate-resistant Grenadian-style homes in Stony Gut in the parish of St. George. Construction is expected to start in 2023, and $2.5 million was budgeted. Mr. Speaker, the drawings were done. Everything was in place, Mr. Speaker, to get this project started. 2022. 2022. Mr. Speaker, in December of 2023, the explanation is we couldn't start because some of the lands were given up. Mr. Speaker, I say go do some homework, because the land you're talking about is not the same land that was allocated for the construction of this housing program. So, Mr. Speaker, if it was not, okay, so let me say this.
Honorable.
Mr. Speaker, am I allowed to continue?
Yes, I was just saying this.
Thank you. All right. I don't want to go to Stony Gut. Mr. Speaker, what I want to say is, Mr. Speaker, this administration, I'm sure, if there is some issue with lands, we have mobilization, we have implementation, we have all kinds of things. We can fix the land problem and start the project for the people. Mr. Speaker, that's all I'm saying. So if there's an issue regarding the land, let's fix the problem. Let us not take a decision that they're not going to get the project because there's an issue with the land. So, Mr. Speaker, if every project has an issue with land, are we going to decide not to do it anymore? Mr. Speaker, I don't accept that explanation, and I am saying humbly so, that cannot be, because I'm sure the lands you're referring to do not have concrete buildings on them. And if we don't have concrete buildings on the land, I am saying, you are accustomed taking back land. Mr. Speaker, she said, should we take back the land? Mr. Speaker, this administration knows best how to take back land. So I am saying, if you have to take it back, put them somewhere else and let us build the facility. There's enough land. How much acres? We must find land for them somewhere else. The only difference I'll advise you, when you take it back, don't leave them in the rain. Find adequate accommodation for them somewhere else. I say leave me alone when I'm talking. Mr. Speaker, I want to quickly move to the constituency. Mr. Speaker, I think I might be the only person who started speaking about the constituency last. I honestly didn't want to start on what, for me, is a very depressing note. But I start by saying, Mr. Speaker, that I continue to feel extremely honored to represent the people of my constituency. Mr. Speaker, the last year and a half has been very difficult. Very difficult. Very difficult. Next year, easier. Okay. You told us that last year. And that's why I don't have any hope, Mr. Speaker, that is going to be better. Mr. Speaker, and that's the thing, Mr. Speaker. They say it's going to get better next year. They told us that last year. But not only that, they told us that things are better. They didn't just tell us things will get better. They said things are better. Mr. Speaker, the glowing report of this administration, unemployment gone down, economy growing, CBI increase in revenue by 213%. Mr. Speaker, something has to be fundamentally wrong somewhere, because nowhere in Grenada the voices of the people are reflecting what this government is saying. Mr. Speaker, we heard that this is the largest budget and that people are going to be happy everywhere. Mr. Speaker, every place I go is the same complaint, Mr. Speaker. People have been losing their jobs. The level of victimization, Mr. Speaker, is real. Whether you want to say it's real or not, it doesn't change the fact that it's real. Mr. Speaker, senior citizens, Mr. Speaker, have been seriously affected by the cuts in the income they receive from government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, all right. So the issue of temporary, Mr. Speaker, I didn't plan to raise it, but because you raised it, let me just address this, because I'm a little bit confused, and I just want to make reference to this, and this is my own conviction of what this situation is. The Minister for Finance last year made these comments. in light of the increased cost of living expenses. In this regard, the following social protection initiative, part of government's strategy to help cushion the effects of the pandemic on the most vulnerable, therefore, Mr. Speaker, a maximum increase of $150 per household for beneficiaries of the SEED program will be in effect from January. This additional benefits exclude those added temporarily. Your word. And I said I had no intention of using this, but since you are convinced that this was a temporary measure, let me just explain this. Those added temporarily as part of the stimulus package. So he said this additional benefit excludes. This was the Minister for Finance. So anything I say, Mr. Speaker, was not worth it. This is what the Minister for Finance, where the money is managed, was saying. But Mr. Speaker, as I said, I had no intention of using this, but let me just help my brother on the other side. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Social Services at the time, my honorable colleague on the other side, she went on to support the Minister for Finance. And she said, Mr. Speaker, we also will be expanding the amount per household so that a house can get up to $150 more than what they were getting last year. We recall, Mr. Speaker, that the maximum a household would get would be $500. Now a household can reach up to $650. And the elderly homes will see increase in what they are given. We are the only government, well, at that time she was talking about the New National Party government, right? She's still correct. She's still correct here. Mr. Speaker, we are the only government, Mr. Speaker, those were her words, that deliver on our promises. We're not telling you, vote us, and when we get into government, we'll give you 400, and instead, when you get into government, hundreds of elderly citizens are being thrown out of the program. Mr. Speaker, this to me confirms an agreement with what the Minister for Finance said. And so, Mr. Speaker, in responding to the comment thrown by the member, as I said, I had no intention of reading this, that this was not a temporary initiative. But you know what I'm convinced about, Mr. Speaker? Temporary or permanent. The NNP administration that I am a part of, was a part of as the administration then, would never, Mr. Speaker, remove $150 from the income of elderly, poor women and men in communities. I'm convinced about that without a doubt, Mr. Speaker. And that is my honest opinion. Mr. Speaker, call it what you wish. Mr. Speaker, when I look through the constituency that I represent, elderly people continue to have challenges getting basic medication, particularly because of that cut they receive. People who never sought help, Mr. Speaker, in 20 years are embarrassed to ask for help. And they tell you that, Mr. Speaker, I never depended on government, I never needed no help, but the current state of things in the economy. Mr. Speaker, I'm still speaking about my constituency. People are denied a basic devotion work, Mr. Speaker, because of their political affiliation. But more so, Mr. Speaker, persons who are approved for housing support, bathroom and toilet support, Mr. Speaker, even when communication from the ministry went to the hardware to issue the material to them, somebody call and say, no, don't give them. Mr. Speaker, this is real. This is real, Mr. Speaker. And we can bloat and we can boast and we can say anything we wish to say about the economy. It does not change what the ordinary man is saying on the ground. So, Mr. Speaker, market vendors from the constituency crying on this Saturday. I met one after 5, almost 6 in St. George's. Can't leave all this stuff on the van. Mr. Speaker, speak to the fishermen. So you don't have to speak to me. You don't have to decide whether what I say is true or false. Speak to the fishermen, Mr. Speaker. People would tell you that they used to sell 300 pounds of fish per day. They're fighting to sell 50 pounds. Mr. Speaker, speak to them. And when you speak to them, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable MP, this is your second bell.
Okay, so Mr. Speaker, can I have 5 more minutes to wrap up?
Granted.
Did you say 20?
I said granted.
No, honestly, I didn't. I thought I must be blessed, but Mr. Speaker, I understand. So, Mr. Speaker, when you speak to these fishermen, they're not only complaining about the amount of fish that's selling. Mr. Speaker, they're talking also about duty-free concession that they used to get. Now, that is a major challenge. I beg that it be looked into. Mr. Speaker, they also Mr. Speaker, rebates. Mr. Speaker, they're begging. I can give you references as soon as we finish. I won't call their names publicly, but I can give you names. And just check them. When they go with the duty-free letter to obtain duty-free concession, what are they told? Mr. Speaker, I am saying they have a letter from the government. Mr. Speaker, businessmen and women, they are telling you this is the worst time they have ever experienced. Speak to boys on the blocks. Everywhere that you go, Mr. Speaker, people are saying things are the worst they have been. Mr. Speaker, Titiri, come up. Mr. Speaker, even Titiri can sell. You ever see Titiri stay back? 10 o'clock last night, Mr. Speaker, passing Titiri. Mr. Speaker, these are signs. And we're supposed to be paying attention to the signs, Mr. Speaker. There is a problem. And what the IMF say is not necessarily the final gospel. We have to listen to the people when they talk. So, Mr. Speaker, I conclude this evening, having listened to the administration present this year. The language is changing a little bit, transformation in the language. Compared to last year, we are hearing now everything takes time. We need at least 10 years. Bear with us. Our salary was too small, so we couldn't do as much. We heard, Mr. Speaker, right here, Mr. Speaker, we heard it. Mr. Speaker, we heard that things were messy, so we had to spend a lot of time cleaning up, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am saying that this administration, well, if you go back, you would find it was actually said, we met a mess. Mr. Speaker, this administration, I believe, should be counting its blessing for what they met. Because when I look at what we met in 2013, and I'm not going to repeat what the presenter said, that they met a mess in 2022. Mr. Speaker, this is what we met. You decide if it was a mess. Mr. Speaker, we inherited a country in recession with a monthly deficit of $15 million. This administration, Mr. Speaker, met a surplus, an overall balance and contingencies in excess of $500 million. Mr. Speaker, in 2013, we inherited a situation when 70 cents of every dollar was being used to pay salaries and pension. Mr. Speaker, this administration met a situation where only 45 cents was being spent on salary and pension. Mr. Speaker, in 2013, we inherited a financing gap of $192 million. Well, of course, we must have cleaned up the mess, Mr. Speaker, that this administration came and there was no financial gap. Mr. Speaker, we inherited a situation where debt to GDP was 110%. We cleaned that up too, Mr. Speaker, so that when they came, the debt to GDP was only 69%. Mr. Speaker, the current account deficit was 27.1% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, that was cleaned up too, so they inherited a surplus, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we inherited, Mr. Speaker, a situation situation where back pay to public officers and pensioners was $40 million. Guess what, Mr. Speaker? That's what we met. But we didn't complain. We cleaned it up. We paid it, Mr. Speaker. And guess what? On top of that, in the same year, we paid another $40 million in salary increases to public officer. Mr. Speaker, not 1 cent then was paid in the 5 years to public officers. Mr. Speaker, every year since then, as I close, $78 million was paid in salary increases. So this administration came, count your blessing, not $1 in outstanding payments to public officers. We carry a pension load of $76 million per year, Mr. Speaker, and I close by saying...
Honorable MP, once your additional time is expired, there should be no further debating. I would only allow time if you want to give thank you compliments.
Yes, and that's what I'll do, Mr. Speaker. Very obedient, that's me. So, Mr. Speaker, recognizing the pension load we carry, I want to say a special thank you to my colleagues. I want to say a special thank you to the people of St. Andrews Southeast for your consistent support, Mr. Speaker. My husband, my children, the rest of my family, the staff at the constituency office, Mr. Speaker, family and friends. But, Mr. Speaker, most importantly, I thank God for His goodness, His grace, His mercies. Thank you.
Thank you to Honorable MP for St. Andrews Southeast. And now I invite the Minister of Finance, MP for St. Patrick East, to close the debate.